Fantastic. Thank you, Ross. Sarah, I'm hoping you have the slides under control. And Ross has already introduced us, so for the sake of time, we won't spend too much time sort of saying what we both do in our roles. But we've both been kind of heavily involved in developing our approach to trauma-informed implementation in Dundee since 2019. So this slide is a little bit tongue-in-cheek and kind of relates back to what Caroline was saying about, the journey along the roadmap isn't necessarily a straight line, but in our case, it's been quite a squiggle. We started our kind of trauma-informed journey back in 2019, so there was no roadmap that was even a glimmer in anybody's eye at that point, I don't think, and we also navigated through the pandemic in that time that we've been working on this, so it definitely hasn't been a straight line. But what we've tried to do with this presentation is look at all the different things that we have done and try and map them to the different stages of the roadmap that we now have. That was really tricky because it hasn't been kind of straightforward, and also some of the elements are so closely linked, it's really difficult to pull them apart, which I think Caroline kind of covered as well, but we've done our best to try and make it a little bit logical. So yeah, bear with us. So throughout the presentation, we have got examples of some of the things that we've done, but we've also tried to pull out some kind of key messages in terms of our learning, which we hope will be helpful for you. So the first one was kind of thinking about where to start. I don't know how far all of you are on your journeys in terms of trauma-informed implementation. I'm sure that everyone will be at different stages. But for us, when we first started to think about this in 2019, it felt really overwhelming, kind of thinking about, that really ambitious vision of a, trauma-informed nation, let alone workforce. So we were kind of like, where do we start with this? It's really overwhelming. And I think what we did was have a think about, well, what makes sense for our area, which is Dundee, and what's the fit for us. And what's kind of live and a priority in our area, but also really importantly, what inspires us locally and kind of fires us up. So hopefully you'll get the sense as we go through that Sarah and I can get pretty fired up, inspired about this work. So prior to COVID-19, we submitted a bid. I think there was an application process open for local areas or local authority areas to submit bids to get funding to look at how they wanted to develop their trauma-informed practice. It feels so long ago, it's like another lifetime. But we decided that we were going to focus on leadership and workforce lived experience. And there were a number of reasons for this, and I'm going to be quick because we don't have that much time. But first of all, we thought we wanted to do something a bit different. We knew that other areas who were submitting applications for this fund were focusing quite a lot on frontline teams and frontline work, which was really, absolutely valuable, but we thought, well, why don't we look at the leadership side of things a little bit more? And that had that fit with Dundee, because at that time there were a lot of redesign and transformation activities going on, and the importance of trauma-informed practice was kind of included within those. So one of the big ones we had at the time was the Dundee Drugs Commission, and there's a quote there on the slide from the recommendation in the Drug Commission report. So they said that without strong leadership and determination to stick with what will be a difficult task, we won't succeed in turning things around. And this was around our drug death figures in Dundee. So those delivering care and support in Dundee must build relationships that are based on respect and trust. And this will provide a starting point for working effectively as a true and equal partnership. Shared culture is needed, which values kindness, compassion, and belief and hope. So that was a really kind of clear message that we were getting, and there was a lot of attention on that drug commission. So that was our fit in Dundee, and so that's where we started. So I'm going to talk a little bit around what we did sort of early on around the leadership work, and then kind of talk a little bit more about the lived experience side of things, as they were our two sort of focus points when we started. So the leadership work, as with everything, has been ongoing and evolving, but there was good commitment early on to this because of those kind of transformation activities that were going on. So we obviously established our steering group. It was quite small to begin with, kind of a group of people who were quite interested and passionate about this, but it's kind of grown hugely over the 4 years, and really kind of found its feet, but we'll talk more about that as we go on. We arranged to have stilt training for our chief officers group and other senior leaders. Obviously, the call came through for local senior trauma champions to be nominated, so we did that in Dundee, and that has actually been something that was really influential in kind of pushing forward the speed that we were able to get this moving. We've done inputs to elected members, IGB members. We held a Violence Against Women in Trauma Summit. A couple of years ago, the Chief Officers Group holds a collaboration event most years, and they made trauma-informed practice the focus of theirs last year, I think it was, Sarah. And then we've also been involved with Shimela and the Resilience Learning Partnership, Improvement Service and Safe Lives on a piece of work called Authentic Voice, which is looking at how do we include the voices of people with lived experience at strategic level specifically. And we can sometimes be fairly good at doing that at operational level, but we were really kind of aware that we weren't doing that well up at the level where we were making policy decisions. So that's a whistle-stop tour of what we did kind of early on and over the years around keeping that leadership message going. So the workforce lived experience bit, this was the second of the kind of starting points for us. And why did we focus on this? And this was all connected to thinking about culture change alongside the leadership part of the work. And being honest, it was the inspire and fire up bit for myself and Sarah. And I have to mention at this point, and Shimela's going to cringe, but it was hearing Shimela speak at a stilt training back in, I think, 2019 that really started it for me, and I know for Sarah as well, and we'll come back to this further on in the presentation too. So that had sparked off some thinking. We know that safe and effective use of lived experience is a really powerful tool for strategy, service design, all these kind of leadership policy bits that we have to do. But we started to reflect that traditionally we've been kind of thinking about people with lived or living experience or experts by experience as being separate from us as professionals. And I think Caroline kind of alluded to that a little bit in her presentation as well. And we were thinking, you know, by doing that, by having this separation, we're really missing the opportunity to utilise the knowledge and experience of trauma that exists within our own workforce and to validate that. So we also kind of thought that it would help us to break down kind of existing power imbalances and barriers, and which kind of create that us and them environment. And we were also thinking that not only is that damaging for the people who are using our services, but it's damaging for us as workers as well. We're human as well. And by being more authentic and more human, it kind of improves our ability to connect with the people using our services, build trust, and all these things that we've heard today about what a trauma-informed organisation looks like. And we also thought it can relieve some of the pressure on us as workers or professionals to keep aspects of ourselves hidden, the old kind of leave your problems at the door kind of idea, and it allows us to be more genuine and more authentic. So for both Sarah and I, as professionals with lived experience, we're both quite open about that within our work, but that came from Shimela and hearing her speak about that. And it opened up the door and it gave us permission to bring that lived experience bit into our work in a more open and authentic way. Because we listened to her and thought, okay, if she can do it, why can't we? You know, it gives permission. So the workforce lived experience kind of piece of work has been a journey for us around this. And as we can kind of go through the presentation, hopefully a key message will come throughout everything that we talk about, that once you open the door for people, in my experience, they don't hesitate. They come run through with enthusiasm. And that's certainly been our experience in Dundee. So the Workforce Lived Experience group was probably the most exciting part of what we were doing, but it was also really challenging. A lot of people, when we first started to float this idea, were really nervous. They were sort of looking at us like we were kind of little renegades roaming about in Dundee, sort of, what are you talking about? There was a lot of nervousness, and we had to do a lot of kind of talking with HR. We met with trade unions. We had to develop a safe process for this to happen and take on board all the feedback, all the concerns, all the worries, and make sure that everybody was safe and comfortable and happy with what we were proposing. And eventually we got to a point, it took us about a year, I think, Sarah, didn't it? To have created a process that everybody was comfortable with, and to then soft launch the idea of the Workforce Lived Experience Group. And at the moment, we have got that just within the Council and Health and Social Care Partnership, but we're looking at widening that out and creating a process for other organisations to sign up. So we soft launched it and people started to show an interest. We provided them with more in-depth information about what was involved. We then had a kind of, I don't like the word screening, but we had a conversation with people who wanted to be involved about what it would look like, what they wanted to get out of it, just making sure that we were, being safe and ethical about it. And then eventually we got the group together. And I think we have about 12 people who are part of the group just now. We want to keep it quite small for the time being. There's a lot more interest in that, but we're just kind of letting that 12 create a network and a relationship with each other just now, because this is new. And so we've been meeting and we've been talking about what we think we could do with our lived experience. It's not necessarily about sharing what that lived experience is, but how do we think? What do we think are the important things that we could influence? So the group, some of the themes are there on the slide. They're not only keen to look at things that haven't been good for them within the workplace, but also what has been good and how we can build on that. There's been discussion about the fact that it's a confidential space, but we can come together as a collective voice. So people sometimes feel it's not safe to come as an individual to sort of challenge or make a point. But if we do it as a collective, we're the Workforce Lived Experience group, and this is what we're putting forward, it felt a lot safer for people. There's been lots of conversations about sort of discomfort around certain things and how we manage the boundaries, but a lot around how we can learn from each other and grow, and obviously feeling valued and being valued. So I think there's a quote on the next slide, Sarah, from one of the people who's been part of the group. I'm going to read it out. But she said, being part of a catalyst for change towards employees with trauma experiences is really positive experience and makes me feel proud that as an organisation, we will be one of the first actually doing this work. Having lived experience of trauma has always made me feel this is something I have to hide from my employers, as I didn't want to feel judged for the effects this can have on both my mental and physical health at times. Since joining the Workforce Lived Experience group, I have actually become more trauma informed and understand myself so much better. I've done lots of reading around trauma and feel this is actually improving my own practice in the workplace as a result of joining the Workforce Lived Experience group. So that quote was just so nice to hear. And I think sort of an unintended consequence there was that this person actually felt she became more trauma informed herself from having done the reading and the research that she brings to the group. So I would love to speak more about this, but we're going to have to move on because of time, but hopefully you kind of get a flavour of that. So I suppose the key message there is start where you are, start with you, find your fit. We did not have a master plan, we didn't have a roadmap, but we just started. We had to start somewhere. And so much of this work has grown organically. And in some ways that's actually really strengthened the commitment we've seen. And I think Sarah and I have reflected quite a lot on how it's evolved, and I was happy to hear Caroline talk about the spray and pray method, because we kind of felt that was something that we were kind of used to doing, lots of clever, busy people meeting to produce lengthy, well thought out master plans or protocols or strategies, and then firing them out and just kind of hoping for the best that will be implemented. And we kind of know that doesn't have much of a reliable record, particularly in the really complex, increasingly complex world that we're now all working in. And it doesn't take account of existing work, local needs, and often the people who can best inform its contents are not consulted, so frontline staff or people using services. So I think what we did, without necessarily being conscious about that, was use a kind of model for improvement. We did lots of small tests of change. We didn't have a single correct plan. No one person had more power. It was really organic, and there was dispersed leadership across this. And it did feel a little bit scary, a lot scary actually, at points when, and certainly for me in the role that I'm in, I'm used to sort of creating an action plan, having targets, having outcomes, and for some of this stuff, we did have some of that, but we didn't have it all the time. And as things kind of grew and evolved, we had to change, and we had to kind of be fluid and go with where we could see that things were working and where they weren't. But actually now, 4 years in, we can see how beneficial that approach has been. I'm going to pass over to Sarah now.
Thanks, Sophie. So lots of themes there, from what we talked about today. So I suppose, part of what we did was there was so much information available nationally as well. We really pulled in a whole range of things around toolkits, learning exchange events, a whole range of menus of ways that people can get involved, which included the Workforce Lived Experience group. But actually what we found was where there was the opportunity to build safe spaces and things like a trauma ambassador network where, we're looking at that dispersed leadership and people who really believe in trauma-informed practice and want to look at improvement and do tests of change or do something that's really going to support their teams and their organisations. We were finding that people were providing and giving themselves the permission to actually say, I'm not just a professional, I'm a human being, I'm a person, and I come as a whole with all my lived experience as well. So I think it was really interesting back to that, initial sort of 2019, 20, 21, 22, we were looking at our baseline without actually having a whole range of different measurement tools. We were looking at where are the opportunities, where are the possibilities. But I think what was really meaningful was, between that early stage of the steering group and the people that were involved in this work, we totally got, how the workforce needed to be upskilled and why training really matters. But this was about meaningful implementation. And around that, kind of building in terms of workforce lived experience and other things, it was about what does this culture change actually look like? And it felt really huge and it felt really scary because actually when you take a step back and think about trauma-informed practice and thinking about the key principles, it actually impacts every area of work that we're actually involved in. It involves every team meeting, it involves, every learning, it involves protection. And you could really see in the context of Dundee, equalities, diversity, a whole range of things about, if we get some of this right, this will create a really, really good, potential impact for everybody involved in this. So everything that we did, we really thought about, the 5 trauma principles and how that almost became not just principles, but our kind of value-based work around this. And we really seen trauma-informed practice as an umbrella term. But a lot of what Sophie mentioned as well was around that organic process. And some of that was about our own discomfort and how we were able to let some of that go to really support people. And also from key leaders, what Sophie mentioned, our 3 trauma champions in Dundee, our senior leadership teams, we really had that buy-in and the permissions, to try something different and new, and it didn't have to be perfect and to sit with some of that discomfort. So that was really helpful as well. So there's been a whole range of different things, but everything we thought about was actually how could we mainstream this so it's not something that's additional or extra, but where are the opportunities right now in any change or any improvement or anything that we could already do, taking that trauma-informed lens and making it meaningful. So we'll talk a wee bit about, some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities around that. And one of the other things, within the roadmap, which we talked about, it hasn't been that really clear step-by-step journey. It's been messy and it continues to be messy, but I think it's messy because it's meaningful and it's about, a whole range of different things as well. Part of that was around, how were we collaborating and developing our trauma implementation plan so that it actually became a plan that was influenced and it took on board all the experiences, and there was that opportunity for it to be fluid and flexible and changeable based on, what we were hearing, based on those feedback loops as well. So we looked at a staged approach to implementation, but also, the Workforce Lived Experience group, the Trauma Ambassador Network, themes that were coming through, a whole range of different activity like trauma learning exchange events that, we did quite early on with the trauma steering group around, what is the trauma journey so far? Where are we? And I think there is that bit about we've never been able to call ourselves as trauma informed as a tick box because it is a journey and we're consistently learning from it as well. But a huge focus again has been around, workforce wellbeing, what's been involved there. And we did quite early on, and I think this was really helpful around that baseline knowledge, was when we did a whole range of different tests of change, we did, we encouraged people to undertake level 1, level 2. We had discussion, we did some bespoke workshops as well. But we've really tried to embed and use tests of change and always take a trauma-informed lens because it really links in with a lot of the other work that's happening around that too. But what we also found is we worked really hard to have all these tools and all these resources that were available for people. But there was all the, there were key barriers in place in terms of time, capacity, workforce stress, workforce well-being. And what we found was really helpful, and what you cannot get away from, is providing the opportunities for people to meet in spaces, physical or remote spaces, to actually have really open and honest discussions and really start unpicking. And even, a lot of the themes that have been coming through, which we'll talk about, is even talking about, what does trauma-informed practice actually mean for people, and the dangers around some of that wording becoming quite tokenistic. But when we unpick it, when we unpick people's experiences and work collaboratively around that, and focus on, the kind of key principles and shared examples, then, you really get people on board in terms of what does that mean for them and their leadership as well. So a lot of it has been quite organic, and we've got a whole range of tests of change that we're kind of happy to talk to people about if they're interested. We have done some that have been specific around education and supervision. I know there's quite a lot of people from education here, but a lot of the tests of change, in terms of that trauma steering group, one of the really early ones was, within my team, learning and organisational development. It was, well, why are we looking out with, let's start and upskill everybody within the team, within the service. And we did, an early trauma lens walkthrough around that as well, and really embedded trauma and trauma learning around everything that we offer and deliver as a service as well. So I think, some of the key messages is there will be roadblocks, there will be bumps, there will be setbacks, but they've also actually been really significant and really important learning opportunities. They've been giving us the opportunity to reflect, to be curious, to try something different, or to ask for feedback as well. And I think that's been really meaningful for us in our journey. But also, what we've talked about, some of the challenges that we're finding now is about, the language, the terms, people operating or being in that kind of red or blue zone in terms of their work, or, what does that look like in terms of getting those real fundamental blocks in place, but also keeping it meaningful to people, keeping it relatable, and when we talk about trauma, we talk about people in their whole self. So I think that's really mattered in terms of workforce lived experience, or what does that mean in terms of the support that's been delivered, and some of the policy work that we've been working on as well. So I'll pass on to Sophie, who'll talk a little bit about some of our future plans as well in terms of some of the work across Dundee.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, when we were looking through this and designing our slides, we got to this section of the roadmap, which looks at consolidating change, feedback loops, all those things, and we're like, I forgot anything much for that. And then we were like, yeah, we've got this, we've got that. And so we've just tried to put a few examples on the slides. So this is kind of all that Sarah's kind of talked about. I've talked about the early stages. Sarah's talked about the sort of test change, the organic growth. And we're kind of, this is where we are now, I would say, with all those things in place. And we were trying to think about, how do we know this is starting to make a difference? How do we, what's the tangible evidence of that? And so there's some examples there. Recently, Sarah and I were asked to speak at the council's corporate leadership conference. That in itself is a tangible bit of evidence to me that something is shifting in our culture, because that would not have happened 4 years ago. And we weren't just asked to speak about trauma, we were asked to speak about workforce lived experience. And we took the opportunity to kind of turn that a little bit on the leaders who were there and say, this is not just about our group that we've now set up, because again, there was a danger of that us and them starting to happen, but it's about you. You're all human. You may be in senior leadership positions, but you're still people. Being in a senior leadership position itself can be really challenging, let alone if you've got your own experience or are experiencing something right now. And it seemed to kind of really have quite an impact on the leadership level when we spoke about that. So there's a quote there on the slide from one of the leaders, and we asked them, what commitment are you going to make to yourself from today? So they said they would continuously remind themselves to be proud of their background, harness the many difficult personal challenges they've experienced towards making me the person and leader I'm proud to be today. That's the change that we're looking for, that people start to value, I think, like Caroline said, value their lived experience and the resilience that comes from that, and the growth that you can experience when you have been through something really traumatic, or many things. Obviously, we've spoken about the Trauma Ambassador Network. That's been a really key kind of part of what we've done in Dundee, and that was in the early days when we started going out and talking about trauma. People wanted to join the steering group. We had like a slight rammy of people wanting to join the steering group, and we were like we want them to be involved, but the steering group's getting out of hand. So what do we need? So we set up the ambassador network, and like Sarah said, that's for anybody across the entire workforce who has an interest or a passion. It doesn't need to be at any particular level in terms of hierarchy or anything. So that has grown from a small group to now, I think, 62 people who are from all sorts of different services across Dundee. And it's become a kind of really powerful tool for change. And now that the voices that come through the Trauma Ambassador Network have now fed into the recent review we did of our implementation plan in terms of what we've prioritised, but also they now have a lead in taking forward some of that work. So they've become a key part, which is one of those organic bits that we were speaking about. We've been using the Workforce Lived Experience group, have been working with HR in the council to review some of their policies through a trauma lens, but a specific one we've focused on has been the attendance management, because that was something that people identified was a really traumatising policy to be part of. And a quote, which I've not put on the slide, from one of the senior HR people involved in that was, when I started doing this, it was because I was told to, but now I'm doing it because I want to. So it's these little nuggets that we get that we think, yes, like there's shifts happening, we're getting there. I'm not going to go through all of these because there's too many, but just wanted to focus in on that last bullet point there, the Women's Hub and Honey Green. So we've really kind of linked our trauma work very closely with our violence against women and kind of gendered approach in Dundee, and so there's a good fit there. And one of the things that the council did was convert one of their their homeless accommodation blocks into a women-only accommodation, because we recognised that women's particular experiences of trauma meant that that option to have a single, a women-only space was really important. They didn't have to go there, but they've got the choice, which is one of the principles. So I was asked to speak at a housing conference in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago, with one of the housing managers. So I'm standing there waxing lyrical about Honey Green, which is the name of the block, how trauma informed it is and wonderful. And a woman put her hand up and said, I live in Honey Green. And I was like, oh, here we go. This is the make or break of whether Honey Green is actually all the things that I'm saying it is. And she basically just stood up and said it's everything that I could have possibly wanted. So that feedback loop for me, those are the ones that mean the most, that actually somebody who's living in this situation is experiencing a better service and a better response. So just wanted to touch on that. In terms of future plans, I'm aware we're running out of time here. We are looking very closely at the governance now of our trauma steering group, because at the moment, like Sarah said, like the reach of it is vast. It cuts, it's not just public protection, we've located it there, but it goes across corporate services, like community planning partnerships, everything. So we're starting to think about, where does this sit in terms of governance and accountability and reporting. So that's ongoing. But I'm gonna carry on just now because we're running out of time.
So just around some of the kind of key messages that we've talked about, the space and the time and investing in people really, really matters. And spaces for reflection, but also sharing people's experiences as well as their worries around this. And actually, how do you make it meaningful? How do you make it relatable? And when we talk about culture change, and Caroline talked a lot about culture change today as well, we talk about hearts and minds, but this is about whole selves. This isn't just about, your brain. This is what happens. And I think it's about people's whole selves, their whole lives, and really acknowledging and letting go of, shame or whatever else might come around here as well. And I think, what's been really helpful around the key trauma principles is actually people having the space and time to invest in themselves as people and as leaders. And actually that's impacted a whole different range of areas of their lives as well, and how we communicate with each other and our intention around it. One of the other things that isn't here on the slide, but I had actually written this down, and I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say what's another thing that's been a key key message. And I think, you know, Sophie and I, we've had the support of each other all the way through this, and we've also not just had that support, we've been able to keep each other accountable in this. And I think that accountability in terms of leadership is really helpful, because I think when things get really tough and they're really hard, it's really easy for something that can feel a bit fluffy like trauma at times to fall off without you kind of coming back and remembering how much this really matters and how much it makes a difference to everybody. And I think with that, sometimes we overcomplicate it. And what we found is keeping it as simple as possible really, really matters. And where there's been an open door, you know, we've tried to open it further. And there's lots of closed doors, but we're getting there as well. And I think it's that whole bit about eating the elephant one wee bit at a time and getting people on board, because people really, really get this when it's done in a meaningful kind of way as well. And we've got a few quotes there as well, which we'll leave there for you. But one other thing we just wanted to highlight again, you know, what we've done in terms of culture change, it's taken time. We're starting to see a lot of the payoff now, but this is a long game. You know, Sophie talks about this all the time. This is going to take time. But actually, you know, it's back to what's within your control. What can you do? What's within your gift and your power as well? So I think a lot of the times it can feel really big and overwhelming, but keeping it simple and keeping it in what's within your sphere of influence is really, really helpful. But another thing that we need to just kind of think about as well is around nationally, the sustainable change around it. You know, I think we need to have conversations around budgets and around some of the investment around this moving forward. And I think there's brilliant work happening nationally and, you know, bringing people together around this. But I think, you know, around this work, it really matters, and it actually incorporates a whole range of different policies and a whole range of different impacts. And I think trauma really is that kind of golden thread all the way through everything. So yeah, it's messy, trust the process, but it doesn't have to be that hard, and it's a bit of a journey. So I'd just like to say thank you for inviting us along, and for Sophie as well. And Sophie's an absolute star in leading this and keeping everybody accountable. So I just need to pop that there just now. Thank you.